This is a review of week 3 of Patrick Lecture 144, The Process of Growing. And for the second week in a row, I'm featuring the guide's thoughts about unity and duality and resistance in terms of our approach to growth. So he included a section here about the intent of the lecture, and that is to help us understand our present position in life, to understand our inner and outer state, and to destroy illusion and erroneous ideas. Now, I often give myself as an example because I don't have the right to give anybody else as an example in a public forum. And I have experienced this week, in the last few weeks, a very large number of erroneous ideas and illusions, desires masked as rationalizations and justifications, a disquiet in me that tries to find an outlet. And if I spend the time, if I take a moment even to look at what's going on, I can feel the turbulence. I may not know what it's about, but I can feel the turbulence. If I can take a moment to just sit and calmly survey it, then I'm often able to see that it's not about the topic at hand. It's not about the thing in front of me. It's already there, and it's like it's looking for an outlet. So that's one of the ways I experience these lectures. And the guide says the words have to be experienced. They're not something you can memorize. They're something you have to take out into the world and try them out. You need to see it, and you need to feel it, and you need to experience the cause and effect of different dynamics and different ways of being before you will understand perhaps a better way of living, a better way of looking at things. So rather than superimposing top down, the idea is to hear the concepts, take them out in the real world, try them out. That's why I usually try to find a lot of relatively banal examples of pathwork, because those you can see around you. They might be in your home or your family situation or out on the street or at the shops that you go towards. Here's an example. There was a book called Traffic that I obtained because I read in the review something that interested me, and that was that there's a quality of being anonymous and alone in a vehicle, relatively alone in a vehicle, that disinhibits us, that suggests or allows a more rapid reaction to outside circumstances, and nobody interrupts our thought process. We go from A to Z in a heartbeat, so that somebody cuts us off, and without even thinking, we get angry about it, and we cut them off. It's not how we might normally act, but there's something that happens when we're alone operating machinery that seems to produce the equivalent, some mild equivalent of road rage. I found the book fascinating, and I've used it very often as an example because as a driver, I have experienced this. Now, you can experience this as a pedestrian walking along a street. Very often, I'm walking along and somebody stops right in front of me, and I get really annoyed and aggravated. And I've trained myself so that it's almost immediate now. I've trained myself to think, when do you do that? It's not deliberate. It's not malice aforethought. It's a lack of consideration, true, but it's more about they suddenly needed all their powers of concentration to think or do something or see something, and they couldn't walk and chew gum at the same time. And I have used that for decades, many decades, to describe that I have a hand-eye coordination problem, so that if, for instance, if I tried to move the mouse and find things on the screen, it would interrupt the flow of my talking. Somehow those two can't handle equal loads of bandwidth in computer talk. And so what I try to find is some empathy for the given situation, a remembrance of where I do that, and to focus on why I do it and to improve that first. Now, I can't fix the world, but I can stop contributing to inconsiderate behavior. And here's the spiritual part. The idea is to believe that this does good, that this has an effect beyond your tiny circle of physical, mental, emotional interactions, that it matters. When you let me start that over. When you stop cursing out the person who interrupted your flow, and you instead take it as an interruption and move around it, that this puts less negative energy out, and that can only benefit all of us. Now, that's a tiny example of what these lectures can do by helping you think differently about a situation than perhaps you have been led to, taught to, or found on your own. So it's about gaining different perspectives. Now, the one that I talked about last week and was repeated this week is a thorny one. And I admitted last week that I was less sure about this than I realized until I got really into it. I feel much more grounded today. And that's a discussion where there are two kinds of growth processes. One is dualistic and the other is unitive. So again, I try to find real life examples of this so you can feel it, observe it, notice it, you have experienced it. So unitive growth is in effect the same as our natural physical growth. Babies don't work at growing. They may work at coordination. They may work to grab that rattle or get that biscuit. However, they don't have to work at the growth process that is happening internally to their cells, their bones, etc. When we have ideas about that growth process, and we try to superimpose upon that growth process. Now I'm going to name some very subtle ways, but when a human being grows, we normally wear clothes. And as a child grows, they need new clothes. They need new shoes. Now, for many people, they can afford to clothe and feed and house their child with, if not no effort, with a reasonable amount of effort. But the truth is, it takes some effort in anything other than a completely rural, completely agrarian, completely out in the open situation. It takes effort to achieve food, clothing, and shelter. And so if a child needs new clothes, there's a stress in that. Where are the new clothes going to come from? Can I afford them? What kind shall I get? When can I go get them? It's a lot of ideas flowing through, not the child's mind, but the adult's mind. And the adult brings them into this situation. It's like we flood the room with our concerns, and the kid may not know what's going on, but they know there are concerns. They can feel it. They can feel the tension in the room. And that's how we superimpose effort onto the growth process. We make it dualistic. What size do you wear? What color do you want? Do you want it today? Do you want it tomorrow? These are real life choices that we need to make, but we're superimposing them onto the growth process. We're literally hoping we won't outgrow our favorite sweater for a while. We're hoping to grow into a new state of being. We have ideas about this. I'm not growing fast enough. I'm growing too fast. I'm growing in the wrong direction versus the right direction. Now, with human beings, we have ideas. Well, this is what's right. This is what's healthy and good. The idea is to realize how dualistic that is because we don't know the path the organism is going to take. They may have to go one way before they go another. The example I often give is a sailing ship that has to tack. It can't tell the wind what to do. It's using the wind, so it has to work with the wind. So if you want to go straight ahead, sometimes you have to go to the left or the right for a period of time before you can catch the wind to get back where you want to go. Organisms do that without thinking about it. It's not a concern. They don't have a template superimposed upon them by the mind about what's right and what's wrong. So what occurred to me is if a tree sapling begins to grow and it starts to grow to the left, very few people stand around and worry about it and try to put trainers on it and coax it back to its position. It grows into a left-leaning tree. And at some point, the tree's trunk is so solidified that it can't be straightened up, and that's the way the tree grows. So I have observed this on the coasts of America, on the West Coast, where the wind is pretty constant on some areas of the coast, and the trees grow sideways. Now, if the wind stops, tree's not going to bounce back. Tree's been growing like that for 10, 20 years, and it's just perfectly happy in that position. We might consider that position picturesque. We might consider it wrong. But this superimposition of what it should be is how we create and support duality. That sounds a little esoteric, which is why I'm trying to bring trees into it, because it's not easy to see in our day-to-day life. So you've got the dualistic approach, which is, it happens in cycles. There's an effort involved. And so there's an up, and then there's a relaxation, there's a down, and then there's an up and a down. The unitive process, it includes this, but doesn't necessarily move according to that. The unitive just is. It's energetic, expansive, it is flowing, it is organic, it does not argue with what the organic process is for that particular being. It never repeats, and it does not need an opposing force to work with. Humans grow or develop, better word than growing, humans develop more quickly when they have something to grasp, something to do, something to accomplish. While this is useful for development, we're not talking about development here, we're talking about growth. Now, the growth will happen in development. It's not that it's exclusionary. But the idea is that in unitive growth, you don't need an oppositional force to overcome, because you are what you are, and you're going to grow into what you're meant to grow into. Because we have a dualistic viewpoint of all this, then we get into good, bad, right, wrong. We get into desirable versus undesirable. And so what the lecture focuses on is constructive versus destructive, which are fancy words for right and wrong. So constructive is good, it's wonderful, that's going to build something, aren't we happy, everything's working well. Then comes the day where some destruction either happens or needs to happen, and we're not as happy. One of my teachers used to use the word deconstruction instead of destruction to try to pull out of the right-wrong dualistic interpretation. So that's, again, what I've habituated myself to think in terms of, is it's not destructive, it's deconstructive. So you build something, you unbuild something, and then you build it again. Think in terms of snakes shedding their skin. It's not possible for snake skin to grow with the animal and provide the coverage it needs to provide. So the snake's got to grow out of it. So it has to split and destroy and discard the skin, and then it will form the new skin organically. If you say something is destructive just because it does something you don't want, now we're into desirable versus undesirable, then you would stop the ability of that snake in particular to continue to grow and develop. Desirable, next week in week 4, the guide went into intuition, which I found fascinating, and so I'm bringing a part of that in. Desirable can be driven by instinct. it can be more about ego survival than something that is necessary or even good for the organism, for the being. On the other hand, undesirable can be driven by intuition, the soul knowing that this is a necessary process to engage with. So the ego can be very unhappy about it, and it may still be necessary. And that tug of war, that resistance, I only want what is desirable, I only want what is constructive, escalates to I only want what I understand. I only value what I know. So we live lives of duality because every single day we are surrounded by and have to deal with material things that do have a dualistic aspect to them. And this influences our outlook about growth and development. Bit of a chat about the process of growing, which is the topic of the lecture 144. Please read the lecture. I change things around and I throw in examples, and sometimes the lecture itself has a way of saying things straight through that click in a certain way. I say that because this week I found a section that was repeated from last week, but it's different. It's phrased differently. And I remember when I was trying to separate, I thought, shouldn't we put all the similar bits together? And what I thought was, well, the guy didn't. Maybe it's necessary to hear it several times in different ways so that it comes together over time through some level of repetition. So there's a flow in the lectures that I do interrupt by making 4 study guides out of it, or 4 sections out of it. Please consider reading it or listening to Gary Balbruch's audio recordings of the lectures. They're free on iTunes, and they're a great help to people who can do the audio thing. So thanks for listening and take care.